Whenever I voice support for Israel's pro-democracy protesters, people ask me, does Judaism believe in democracy altogether? And my answer is very simple. Before you look at religion, look at where Jews live. 95% of Jews live in liberal democracies. And the reason is because Judaism cannot be practiced under tyranny. And so the fact that Jews move to liberal democracies should be the biggest warning for you when thinking about taking away or diminishing democracy in Israel. Because if there is no democracy, there are no Jews. En melech belo am. There is no king without a nation, and there is no Israel without democracy. Jews always flock to places where they can practice according to their belief. And even if you will be able to impose your belief, religious belief, Jewish belief on others as a theocracy, guess what? You will see no Jews in that country because every Jew understands Judaism in their own way. And if you think that you'll impose your opinion on others, you'll be very, very rudely awakened by finding out that others have moved away. And so the fact that the founding fathers of the United States of America were religious people should make you wonder about them. Did they not think religion should be done in a way that it was done in Europe? Did they not believe in some kind of theocracy if they were religious people? And the answer is, of course, they've seen what happens in Europe when people try and impose their opinion on others. They have seen the bloody wars that killed more than a third of Europeans, and they know how violent theocracy can become. And so regardless of what there is in text, always remember that if you want to see Jews living in a country, if you want to see people living in a country and flourishing in it, democracy is the key to it. Of course, yes, there are successful monarchies in certain countries in which it was always that way, Saudi Arabia and others, but in general, Jews always flocked to democracy and always did so because of the need and desire to practice Judaism as they wish. Take a look at the United States of America. Most Americans have a Christian belief and therefore Sunday as the day of rest. The reason we are able to live as Jews in the United States of America is because it is a liberal democracy. And when there were growing numbers of Jews in America, laws were made to allow for the minority to practice religion as they wish. It is a sacred principle of society that you must make sure that everyone can thrive in society, and that can only happen through liberal democracy. With no liberal democracy, you will have coercion that will eventually turn on you. Even if you think you are winning one day, guess what? You will not be winning the next day. And so thriving for a theocracy in Israel is something that will backfire in a spectacular way against those advocating for it, because eventually we all have different opinions, and if we cannot respect people with other opinions, they will not respect ours when their turn comes and when they take power, and that is the beginning of an end of a society. That is in terms of the pragmatic side of things before we get into any faith. Now in terms of the sources, take a look in the sources in the book of Deuteronomy, Chumash Dvarim. What does it say there about a king? It says that if the Jewish people go to Israel, they might desire a king like other nations. It's portrayed as a very negative idea. The fact that Jews do not want a monarchy because God told them is the way we are introduced to the idea of a king. And so God says to the Jewish people, if you might want a king, and you do that because you're influenced by foreign influences, not from Judaism, then here's what you should do about it. But definitely it is not presented in a positive way. What the ideal form of government is, I don't know. But I do know that the Torah cautions us against a totalitarian government with all power that it wants. Next, take a look in the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges. You have the story of the children of Gidon, Yerubbaal, you have Yoash, and you have Yotam. Yotam's siblings are all killed by Avimelech, his brother, and they want to appoint Avimelech as a ruler on them. And he gives the famous story about the trees, and he says, which tree wanted to be king over everyone? Was it the fig tree? No, the fig tree has a life. It has good fruits. Was it the grapevine? No, the grapevine does a lot of good things. It doesn't need to be king. Who ends up flocking to positions of absolute power? It was the tree that has no fruit and just prickles and only causes trouble. Dictatorship, tyranny, and absolute power of a government always invite the most corrupt and the most really self lacking in virtue type of people. And so, yes, again, there are monarchies that are done that way for generations, and that's fine. But if you look at countries like Russia and other countries where power is being grabbed up, then you should know that that is exactly what's going to happen in Israel. You will have, just like in the book of Judges, you will have the worst elements of society flocking to get unchecked power with no one being able to stop that. And that is a very big caution. Go on to the book of Samuel. What do you see in the book of Samuel? You see the Jewish people asking the prophet Samuel for a king. And what does he do? He breaks out in tears. He's crying. Why is he crying? Because he says this is a rebellion against God. And so giving unchecked power to politicians is a highly regrettable idea. It is strongly condemned by the book of the prophet of Samuel, and he says, look, if you have someone with unchecked power, he will take your sons to be his soldiers, he will take your daughters to be his chefs, and he will take your property and everything, and you can do nothing about it. It is called Mishpat HaMelech. There will be no way back from this, he warns them. And so as Israel faces the idea of a political body that's taking more and more power to itself, remember with caution the words of Samuel. Remember what he tells the Jewish people, what kind of unbridled corruption and dictatorship and destruction that will lead to. There is no such a thing as a theocracy on this world that we know of that is perfect. And that is why democracy that is liberal with checks and balances is necessary. That is from the book of Samuel, the warning that he gives them. I must say the story of David and Bathsheba to me is also a story about unchecked power. Look what can happen if the king has unchecked power. I'm not getting into the intricacies of the story and what it means and what the rabbis say in the Talmud about it. All very important things. But the bottom line is, if you give one person unbridled power, just remember that he can do whatever it is that he wants to you and your family. And that is the idea of the book of Samuel, sharing with us the story of David and Bathsheba. Then you go on to the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah, and you see the terrible horrors that were perpetrated by many of the kings. And who was the check on that power? The prophets. The prophets, Jeremiah, Isaiah, many others, they were the ones who came to the kings and said, that's not okay. And so the number one thing that Israel needs now are checks and balances. And if there will be no checks and balances, you will see the kind of situations that are warned in the book of Samuel. God tells the Jewish people, listen, you're going to be in a whole lot of trouble if you do this. If you do not have proper checks and balances, you will have situations like the prophet Isaiah had to confront. And that is kings and politicians with greed and desire to do whatever they wish and nothing that can stop them. And unfortunately in Israel, with all of its imperfections, the Supreme Court is the only check on the government's power. There is nothing else. There is the Supreme Court, and that is what's being challenged now. So if someone wants to create a more diversified form of power in Israel, if someone wants to have a constitution written, if someone wants to make other structures that will ensure corruption is rooted out and power does not become absolute power, that is fantastic. But the idea that we should give more power to politicians, we should give more power to those who can benefit from it with greed and unbridled desire to really garner every kind of resource that they want, is a huge mistake. And that is why I side with Israel's pro-democracy movement. It's an important movement. It maintains all the basic ideas that are outlined right here in these books, whether it's from the Torah itself to the later books. The idea that people cannot just rob other people, that government must be for the people, and that you cannot have embezzlement and corruption, which is what happens when checks and balances are violated. So my prayers are, my thoughts are with Israel's pro-democracy movement. And remember, Judaism does believe in checks and balances. Judaism abhors and rejects the idea of absolute power. Judaism does believe in the idea of acharei rabim lehatot, you must follow the majority, and Judaism does not believe in the kind of unchecked greed that we are seeing from some of the pro-dictatorship groups in Israel now. My message is to the people fighting for democracy in Israel, God bless you. I stand with you at all times.